I eventually decided to include an introduction to this video because I felt that maybe I had to explain why I made the video and why it's kind of thrown together pretty quickly. My best research materials are actually in storage, so I don't have easy access to them and I can't go into huge depth, and I realized that even my very simple version of this takes up over an hour. So I can only really give a summary of what you see on the screen. I decided to put a pretty long introduction on it too, giving history and background of the subject, which is the Adirondack Scenic Railroad. I actually worked on the Adirondack Scenic Railroad from 1992 to roughly the year 2000. I did some things for them, later, as late as 2002, but most of it was in the 1990s. And I was involved in promoting the restoration of the Adirondack Scenic for about 2 years before I started working on it. So it was the first really big project I did, you could say. And there's so much history connected to that I've actually omitted it here because there are all these people who I knew who I haven't really talked to about this. The only historical figures I have featured in this video are William Seward Webb and his wife, who were instrumental in building the railroad originally in the early 1890s. And I also give a quick mention to David Gray, who worked for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and who also volunteered for us. He was one of my friends. Unfortunately, he died pretty early on in the project, so there's a memorial brick to him in the video that you'll see. But I make little mention of people like Mark Cavassorian or Doug Ellison, who are also very important in the early days. I was pretty good friends with them too, actually, and I caught up with Doug Ellison a year or two ago because I wanted to write a paper about the computers we had. And I have not really done them justice in this at all, but it's kind of an apology I'm giving here for not saying more about them. And there were probably about 120 other people, in addition to them and me and David Gray, who helped build the railroad to what it is now as a preserved railroad. So I put together this video because I figured it was time, and I had just done a video of a short excursion that I took on the Adirondack in the summer of 2018, which is already 2 years ago, actually, so I was very slow in producing this. And this video will not do justice to the history. It will give a rough summary of what the excursion is like. And I apologize in advance for its being much more basic than what I could do if I had all my books in front of me. I apologize in advance for doing another Wikipedia run-through here. Unfortunately, my best books on this subject are stored with my parents. I don't actually have them in my room here. But I do know a lot of the background history because, of course, I read all those books. This is William Seward Webb. He was a physician, but he also was a politician. He was a member of the Vermont House of Representatives. He was an inspector general of the Vermont militia. And he spent much of his life in Vermont, even though he was from New York City. But his best-known work was as a railway tycoon, literally. He actually married the daughter of William Vanderbilt, who was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, Eliza Osgood Vanderbilt Webb. She actually was normally referred to by her nickname Lila, and he named one of the lakes on his game preserve in the Adirondacks after her, Lake Lila. And he married her in 1883. And almost immediately, William Vanderbilt gave him control of the Wagner Palace Car Company, because Webster Wagner, who was the president and founder of Wagner Palace Car Company, was killed, crushed between two of his own railroad cars. And although the Vanderbilts controlled the Wagner Palace Car Company, they wanted Webb to run it for them. Wagner were actually a competitor to Pullman in operating luxury sleeping cars. And until about 1898 or so, the New York Central used them instead of Pullmans on all their famous express trains, at least the ones that operated at night. And as they're saying here, Webb later became president of the Fulton Chain Railway Company, although they're not mentioning whether this was the Fulton Chain from Thendara to Old Forge or whether this was the older Fulton Chain or the peg leg. I don't actually know that personally. Somebody might be able to confirm that if it was one or the other or both. Fulton Navigation Company operated steamboats on the lakes in the Adirondacks. The Racket Lake Transportation Company operated primarily a railway from Carter to Racket Lake, which is now defunct. He was the builder and president of the Mohawk and Malone Railway. This is the reason I'm including him here, which operated from, actually not Mohawk, but Herkimer, across the Mohawk River, up to Montreal in Canada via Malone. And that railway line was taken over. We'll jump over here. This is the very short Wikipedia page in the Mohawk and Malone, which was also called the Adirondack and St. Lawrence. If you go through the history books, it's not at all clear what the distinction is between the two of them, because even in most of the documentation, you see both names used. But actually, the New York Central began leasing the company in 1893 and merged it into the New York Central in 1913, when the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad was also consolidated into the New York Central lines. It's not mentioned here, but it is significant. They had a number of subsidiaries that became part of the larger parent company at that point. There was also a branch line from Lake Clear Junction to Saranac Lake, which was significant later because it allowed them to connect to the Shadow Gay Railway, which came down from Plattsburgh and which continued through Saranac Lake to Lake Placid. So when the Shadow Gay closed, the New York Central bought up the Saranac Lake to Lake Placid line, and it allowed the Adirondack to survive after the New York Central discontinued service between Lake Clear and Malone in 1958 and began running trains just to Lake Placid, some of them tourist trains. Passenger service ended in 1965, and when the Penn Central took over the New York Central in 1968, they only operated the line until 1972 when Hurricane Agnes damaged it very badly. And they didn't want to repair just a branch line in arguably one of the worst periods in American railroad history, especially in the Northeast. I'll have to finish this in the next video.